Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Or is it evening? It's evening. Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Chai Chat and Community. My name is Anushka and I am the founder of Bimba Chavan. I'm going to be your host tonight. Before we start off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we now call Australia, on whose lands we live and work, and on whose lands we have lived and worked in the past, present, and emerging future. Now, World Mental Health Day was on the 10th of October, and October is also Mental Health Awareness Month. And in light of this, today we will be focusing on understanding anxiety, and specifically through a cultural lens, because, within our culture, it is, I guess, mental health literacy is a little bit scarce. So in terms of anxiety disorders are the most prevalent type of disorder. It affects 3.3 million Australians. That's 1 in 6 people. And I think it's a term that's become more common into our vocabularies in recent years. However, I feel like a lot of people are still unable to define or identify or understand anxiety. And, if you can't identify with something, you can't work through it because you don't know what you don't know. So today I've got a wonderful panel of people that are highly qualified. So I'm going to go around the room a little bit and get everyone to introduce themselves before we dive into some questions. I'm going to start off with Smruthy.
Hey everyone, my name is Smruthy. I'm a psychologist and I work here in Melbourne with both young people and adults. And I qualified in India, I trained there and I worked there for a long time before moving. So I consider that migrant experience as well as a part of my expertise and work with cross-cultural issues a lot.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone want to take the next? I will just pick otherwise. No? Kano, you go.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Krishnadevti or Kano. I am a youth and diversity advocate. I don't have any professional mental health background, but I do come with the experience of working with the community, working with the young people on the ground, but with them, and also have some personal lived experience of going through anxiety and a few other mental health things here and there. So that's the perspective that I'll be coming in from. I'm very excited to get into the conversation today because I feel like it's something that doesn't get spoken about a lot in our day-to-day lives. And originally, I'm from Gujarat in India. I was born there, migrated from India back in 2007. So a long time ago. So I consider myself a hybrid between both cultures, but still very strongly identifying with being Indian and calling myself Indian.
Thank you. Mallika, over to you.
Thanks, Anushka. Hi, everyone. My name is Mallika. I am a social worker who has predominantly worked in youth mental health and more recently working in migrant and refugee mental health. Whilst I was born here in Melbourne, I lived in Bangalore in India from the ages of 12 to 18, and that really has influenced my experience as a migrant of sorts and kind of navigating being a Indian that also is Australian and what that means. And that has really impacted and influenced how I work in the youth mental health space as well.
Amazing, thank you. And over to Bimba.
Hey everyone, I'm Bimba. I am a counselor, but I also design mental health training programs and I'm a group facilitator. Like most of you here, I've also traveled my own journey from Mumbai in India to Melbourne. And I've just been 3 years in Melbourne and exploring and working with international students, especially from diverse communities in and around here. And yeah, it is anxiety provoking to move or do any transitions in life, and we'll talk about that later. But I think every day is a journey, and yeah, that's it. That's me.
Amazing, thank you. So absolutely, I feel like the whole migrant experience here is quite strong because I feel like now that I'm hearing everyone's stories, I'm like, wait, none of us are actually originally from Australia, which is such a great thing for us to touch on in a second. But I think what I want to start off with is, how do you guys define anxiety? And feel free to jump in and let's just have a conversation around this. But I get somebody who works with both young people and adults, I'm finding that more and more, even when people come through and they start describing some of their symptoms, whether if it's physical or just even explaining a situation, I'm like, sounds like you've got a bit of anxiety. And they're like, is that what that is? So I guess my question to you guys is, how do you define anxiety? How do you identify it? And I mean, when was the first time you learned about it? Because one question at a time. Let's go with that.
I might jump in if no one else wants to start. And I think it's important to bring in a little bit of that clinical perspective as well, because at the end of the day, when you're working with somebody who experiences anxiety, you are going to think about it in terms of mental health and what are you doing in terms of treatment. So if you look at it from that clinical perspective, like diagnostically, you're going to think about anxiety in terms of, vague fear that is not set on one particular object. So it can come across a range of different situations. It has all these different symptoms that are physical and emotional and cognitive or mental. And you want to be able to identify, okay, these symptoms, these three, those two, all of these together represent anxiety. So while it is normal for everyone at some point in time to feel anxious, it's not just nervousness. It's not fear either. It's not full-blown fear that you have in one particular situation. Say, you're going to be in a traffic accident, you feel that fear. It's not that. So anxiety is something that for a lot of people they experience in a lot of different situations across the lifespan for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, I am going to say it is a form of vague, non-specific fear.
Yeah.
That I think it's a bit tricky because you can still function with anxiety. And I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Like, it's fine. I'm fine because I can do my everyday things.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in with their idea of or their definition of anxiety or add on?
I think as always, Smruthy always has the best definition.
Yeah.
As someone with lived experience and living experience of anxiety and working in the space, I think it's also with anxiety, it's one of those things where it might not be a specific fear or it is a specific fear and you can kind of get by, but it's when you start to notice that you are changing a lot of things to maybe avoid the thing you're scared of, or you're noticing yourself really struggling in certain situations because of that stress and fear, and you are constantly having to make everyday changes to make it manageable or easier to navigate. So it can be easy to brush off as, oh, it's fine because I'm still able to do this thing. But when you stop and recognize how much it's impacting your life, how much it's making you miss out on the life you want to live sometimes, that's when you can start to maybe pick up that maybe there's something more than just being scared or anxious or worried. And that was a big sign for me as well, personally.
Yeah, that's huge. That whole concept of what am I actually missing out on? And you might not notice it, but I think that's a really, really great point, because I like to ask my clients that too. What do you, if you didn't have this feeling, what would you be doing differently almost,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to bounce off that. I think, again, I'm coming from not a professional background. I've heard of the word, anxiety, this and that, since growing up in Australia, going to schooling, you hear about these things, or you see organizations like Headspace marketing about it. But I really realized what it was, and the work that I do in talking to people, doing a bit of public speaking, there's always a bit of fear, there's always a bit of, a bit of stress here and there, which I've gotten somewhat used to. But earlier this year, I've had a few serious cases where I was like my breathing would pick up. I feel like I couldn't some of the symptoms that I had, I feel like I couldn't talk at the same time, which I've never experienced before, because I've always been a very social person, done public speaking for a couple of years now, so it felt very normal to me. But I started to, when my personal life wasn't going as well, that's when I felt like it started impacting my career or the things that I was doing day to day, which before I did normally, but now it's like, oh crap, I'm finding this 10 times harder to do a normal activity. And that's why I started to deep dive into, okay, what is happening? This is is this anxiety? Is this not anxiety? And then eventually I got some professional help and got more vocabulary and more education around it. But I think unless you don't, I think we touched on before, unless you don't identify it, or unless you didn't grow up with that education, it's a bit hard to pinpoint it.
Absolutely, yeah. Some really, really great points there. I also wonder if, like, in terms of anxiety, I see people feeling the need to sort of control their space. And I think this is coming back to the points that you guys were both talking about, is that you start doing things and in a way that you're like, oh, maybe I'm just like an extra organized person. But if, for example, running late will make anyone a little bit worried. But if you're getting nervous to the point where your heart is racing and you feel like the world is ending, it might be a sign that there's probably a little bit more going on for you in the background. And as Smruthy said, it might not be about a particular thing, or it could be. But generally, I think, and that's the thing with anxiety, right? It gets generalized to like all parts of your life. You can like also deflect and all the rest of it. But I think I think in terms of the symptomology, I mean, does someone want to talk about like the physical, sort of the emotional and the mental symptoms of anxiety and what that kind of looks like as well, so that if people were to wonder, like, am I experiencing this? What would that look like? Yeah.
I think what has been the most frequently shared examples is not getting any sleep.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag, that either it is sleeplessness or difficulty falling asleep or just staying awake with your thoughts, and there's a constant spiral of thoughts that are going on. And the clients that I see often say that I just don't want to think anymore because it's just so yeah, we all want that sense of calmness in our, so we know what it feels like not to have that sense of restlessness, and that's where you sort of identify that I'm not able to do it. So that strikes me as a physical symptom predominantly.
Yeah, that's a great one, actually. What about you, Smriti? What are some things that come up for some of your clients?
I think I'm just going to extend that point Bimba spoke about with the physical symptoms, and mention that while working with people who speak other languages, people from other cultures, oftentimes physical symptoms become the easiest to talk about. It's
Yeah.
so much easier to describe that, I've got sweaty palms, I've got headaches, I can't focus, or yeah, my heart is racing, I feel faint, I can't sleep, I can't eat, rather than say, we were talking about this before, that a lot of languages don't have words for anxiety. So how are you supposed to describe anxiety without just using the word for fear, using the word for, I don't know, something else, panic,
Yeah.
without actually saying, yeah, this is what you're experiencing. So it's really important to know what those symptoms can collectively signify for that person. And I think you've broken it down very well as well, because anxiety does present differently in terms of the emotional overwhelm, in terms of panic, fear. Um, a lot of the emotional or kind of mental symptoms can look like catastrophizing,
Yes.
always thinking up worst case scenarios, always doubting yourself or doubting the situation. Yeah, and I think what Malika spoke about before, avoidance as a behavior, yeah, it's very telling when you're starting to avoid situations, avoid people, avoid saying certain things, or yeah, just avoid anything that triggers anxiety for you. So it's important to look at it from that, those different kind of sets of symptoms that can present with anxiety as well. Yeah, those are some of the things
Yeah.
that I can think of.
No, absolutely. Do you guys also find, and this is for everybody, but like in the spaces that you're in or the people that you interact with, whether if those are clients and or whoever it is that you're working with, that quite often people are anxious about being anxious. So like on that note of being avoidant, it's like, I don't want to do the thing because I'll eventually feel not great, so I'm just not going to do it. But then it's like like the cycle just perpetuates, and you keep going until you sort of learn to break it. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's it, it's. In my experience, I've seen that kind of anticipatory anxiety can be a huge barrier to accessing therapy. Yeah, if you're worried to even name it or talk about it, or if there is stigma associated with experiencing anxiety, well, you're not going to go to therapy then, are you?
No, because exactly. Actually, speaking of stigma, and we're talking about the cultural side of things as well, this whole conversation around vocabulary and language. I mean, I think one is that we were speaking pre-show about the fact that we don't really know the Hindi, or, well, I don't know the Hindi word for anxiety. Not sure if anyone else does, so please comment if you guys are out there knowing it.
It's Ghabrahat usually.
Yeah, which I
Yeah.
thought in my head, but I'm like, do we really tell people that that's how
It's
we're feeling?
worry, yeah.
It's more like we're a little bit worried about something. It's
Yeah.
never in the context
Yeah.
of, I think, the Western world. But I mean, aside from language, what do you think are some barriers, like some cultural barriers, or like cultural factors that might impact anxiety? And I mean, this is a can of worms that is just opening up because we were talking migration. So like, yeah, I don't know. What's the first thing that kind of comes to your mind?
I think like if we're not talking about it, it's hard to know that maybe this collection of experiences that we're having is actually anxiety. And so sometimes it can be that in our communities, we're not really talking about it because we don't know about it. And then it kind of perpetuates that cycle a little bit as well. And it's only when maybe you see a doctor that you trust that's like, hey, maybe something is going on, or a friend that maybe has read this resource and kind of speak to it, that maybe we can kind of identify it better. But sometimes we just don't know that there's actually a word or a thing to describe these experiences that we're having that collectively means something is going on and something needs to be worked on.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah.
So true.
And
I think this
there is
belief.
sorry, Bimba, you go.
No, this belief that this can't happen to me
Yeah.
is such a strong one that even if you know the word anxiety, you may be like, no, that's not me. And I think that sense of just it's outward, it's Western, it's big words. I have heard parental figures say it's maybe acidity, not anxiety. Like something wrong with your stomach.
Bimba, that was what happened to me. I had acidity, not anxieties, for the longest time.
Yeah. So and there is that sense of a lot of young people are developing a lot of physical symptoms, which if you go to the GP, they may sort of question it or not, or I don't know how does maybe it's getting lost somewhere, but there is physical manifestations, which is the easiest than to share that.
It's like having lots of stomach problems, then people are like, I just, maybe I've got IBS and you might, I mean, those things go hand in hand as well. Understanding that anxiety also is part of, like, there are comorbidities, there are physical comorbidities to having anxiety, but you said something about parents like just before, and it's put into my mind. A parent recently was like to me, but you don't think it's like one of those trends, right? Like the adolescents, like the teens, they're just having this trend of like anxiety. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's not a trend, promise. Which I can understand where that thought process comes from, but let's try and understand what might be impacting your children as well. Which, go ahead.
Sorry, Anushka. I was going to add, like, I think there's this process of many people dismissing the experience of, it's not bad enough, so it can't possibly be that. Or like Bimba said, it's not going to be, it can't be me that's going through it. Or what you said of parents saying it's a trend, or it's not that bad enough. If you just don't think about it, then it can't bother you. So in that process of dismissing and minimizing these experiences for different community members, what does it say for them to feel confident to then say, actually, no, something is wrong and I need help?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to expand on the culture side of things. I think as migrants and refugees coming to a country where our risk tolerance is very low, because one, we're starting from scratch. We want to financially be secure. We want to have a citizenship. We want to have all these things. So those external things, our risk tolerance in general is very low. Where I guess growing up, my other kids will be playing these crazy sports. They'll be doing this, whereas my friends are now, let's be safe. Let's not do anything risky. Because one, they don't know the systems, how it works. There's language barriers, there's cultural barriers. And I think sometimes growing up in that very like protected, that protectedness, and then now when you become a young adult, you're exploring different career avenues, which you've dropping out of university for myself, doing all these new things that maybe you weren't growing up with, or it's going outside of that risk, that safety net that's been set on you. That in itself can be quite worrisome, or can be induce anxiety, because you've been taught to grow up not taking any risk. You're a visitor in this country, not to do anything out there, and then when you start thinking about doing it, you're like, oh, this is going against my parents' values, my culture's value. I'm doing
Oh
something
yeah.
new. I think that back from a young person's perspective, that's what I found is quite big, where they've been growing up in a certain way that they don't want to, when they do something new that's a bit risky, or their parents would call it risky, it
Yeah.
can bring up that little bit of fear, or that, oh, I don't know if I should do this. And from the general multicultural field,
Yeah.
our parents are moving here, our elders are moving here without knowing
Mm.
how Centrelink works, how this works, how
Mm.
um, even all these systems work, and they don't want to take a risk because they don't want to be outside of their comfort zone either. So I think as we, I guess, the Indian community now sees more generation coming through, living, growing through for many, many years, our risk tolerance will go high, and we'll do these new high risk activities that we maybe 10 years ago we didn't think of doing, because we just want to be safe, have money. And now we're doing all these new things where it's like, oh, it's a bit risky. We've never get this before. And I think that can bring a bit of, a bit of a fear, a bit of worrying. Oh, I don't know how this is going to go.
I think that's a great point. That idea of like, making waves, or that fear of making waves when you're new to a community, I think is a really, really strong one for a lot of migrants. On that note of like cultural values, though, has anyone seen, and I have some examples of this, but I want to throw it out there to you guys first. Has anyone seen or experienced any sort of that cultural values clash, and I think intergenerationally specifically, and how that might manifest as anxiety?
I think with a lot of kind of South Asian cultures, it's very easy, very much related to what Kano was saying. There is risk avoidance, there is a lot of inherited pressure to perform.
Yeah.
And when there is that pressure to perform, there can also be a little bit of perfectionism that brings in the perspective that you have to do everything well. You owe it to your ancestors who migrated here so that you could have a better life than them, and things like that. So there's so much pressure to do things that maybe everyone can't actually do.
Mm.
And, when you can't achieve that, it's natural to be anxious or to feel like you're not doing your best, or to start comparing your
Yeah.
achievements with other people, and start feeling bad about yourself. So all of those things kind of go hand in hand, and it is a huge cultural clash. And also when people see that you can't really talk about this on the outside. So if you do talk about it, that is going to make you stick out like a sore thumb. And
Yeah.
you don't want to be ostracized from your community, from your family. Otherwise, you'll be, the dysfunctional one.
Yeah.
Culturally, there is a lot of conflation about mental health issues with full blown dysfunction, or somebody being completely unwell. There is not a lot of nuance in that understanding that somebody could have anxiety, or somebody could have a depressive episode, and they're still kind of generally okay. They need some support, or they need a few strategies to get by. That is not necessarily the same as being completely unwell or completely dysfunctional. But oftentimes, with the lack of language to describe our experiences, that just that just leads to a person being ostracized.
No, absolutely. And that, that whole mental health stigma is so embedded. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, so, so embedded. Um, yeah, does anyone
I
else
think,
have, yeah,
yeah, I think we are satisfying the expectations of two worlds. We have
yeah,
the world of our own culture or community of origin, and the world that we are living here in Australia. And that was true for myself when I migrated here. I'm like, I have my own identity that I want to fulfill, and have those high standards of expectations, whether it's a professional identity or an education identity. But at the same time, you need to sort of there is this concept of guilt shaming of how
yes,
could you not keep in touch, or how can you do that. And that has been so normalized that
mm,
it feels okay. I mean, I didn't even know there was a word called guilt shaming till in the last few years, because that's how we have sort of seen it in movies, not only in our families. So it's like extended to a larger culture.
well, it almost feels like it's
So
part of the culture. It's like it's
yeah,
normal.
so the conflicting value is self-sacrifice. I
Yeah,
don't think that's the most people who are young people or even adults, they don't get it. They're like, why are you asking us to do that?
No.
Yeah, yeah. And there
That
is
self-sacrifice is a really good term, though, because I see this in a lot of sort of young adults. And in my head, young adults like 20 to 30. So I'm going to put it out there. But like what I see is, and especially like sort of children of first generation migrants, when you have that values clash, even with your parents, because you're trying to balance, I think if you're the children of migrant parents, you tend to sort of assimilate a little bit better into the community. But again, that balancing act is a little bit harder. But what you find, or what I hear from a lot of my clients, is that they kind of struggle to meet the expectations of their parents and then meet their own expectations as well. And that could be cultural stuff. It's like, don't marry or date outside of your outside of your culture, for example, or outside of your particular caste. And they might be like, well, actually, I'm in love with the French boy down the street and now I don't know what to do, or I'm not allowed to date. And those things might just, it's almost like, do I sacrifice what makes me happy for my parents? Or even in terms of what Kano was saying, when you come to picking your career choice or what you're studying, do I do what is better for me and what I actually enjoy, or do I go along with what my family expects of me? So I really do think that self-sacrifice is one of those big factors in terms of anxiety, and when we look at it from a cultural lens.
and if people are taking up the courage to choose these unconventional paths, whether it's gender identity, whether it's profession, whether it's career, there is that constant fear of being found out.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's the fear of being found out, whether if you're at the library studying, or anything. Like, yes, I went to my degree today. No, I dropped out of uni like 2 days ago. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to tell you.
And I think it's really hard, especially like you were saying, for children of migrants that are kind of navigating a culture which celebrates you being assertive and confident and choosing your own decisions and prioritizing individuality. It's hard when you go to school or uni or your work and you have to be this version of yourself, and then you go home or you visit family, whether it's here or overseas. And how do you juggle that? And yeah, there's the fear of being caught out, both from your own family, but also from your community at work or school or whatever as well. So it's constant.
Absolutely. You're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like the whole way through your life for like a very long portion. And then something significant happens. Either you've reached whatever potentially you were supposed to in your career, or you get married, or whatever happens. And then it's almost like the spotlight gets kind of a little bit taken off you. But you're right, that fear of being caught out. But even like you're not even being caught out for anything that is bad, if that makes sense. And I think that's the thing, you guilt trip yourself, or the community or the values that we sometimes grow up with, or the expectations that we grow up around, kind of guilt trip you into feeling like you're doing the wrong thing constantly. And even you going against, I think, if you're having to lie to your family at home or not maybe be completely truthful, I think that is actually quite anxiety provoking, because it goes against your own core values of being honest.
Yeah, I just want to add that, there's this idea of therapy and seeking help. And culturally for us, talking to somebody outside of the family, talking to somebody who isn't a community elder, is a completely foreign idea. Seeking support from a mental health professional is not a cultural value for us to begin with. So that is another kind of clash that can come in, that how can I talk about something that might cause harm to my family or shame to my family, to somebody else? Are they going to judge me? Because that's what usually happens if I talk to somebody else. Yes, it can be one of the biggest barriers as well, when that's not really encouraged.
And I think, adding on to that, I know from my Indian experience, because I think there's a billion of us, so we're going to have different experiences. But I guess from my experience, I think a lot of it's, like the way I am, or the way I carry myself, is almost reflective of my family. I think in the Indian community, it's almost like I have two different reputations. I have my white reputation, then I have my brown reputation. And in my brown one, it's reflective of my family, where I come from, how I, where, after that community life. Whereas my white one, it's more based on me solely. It's obviously it's reflective of my parents, but not so much. Whereas I feel like in the brown community, crap, I'm not carrying just myself. I'm carrying my parents' name, my family name. I'm carrying my whole community's name, and I think that in itself can be a bit of a juggle. Like, crap, if I put the brown identity on, I got to be this way. I can't be found out. I think we talked about, or I got to talk in this manner. I got to wear these certain clothes. I got to, eat these certain foods. Whereas the white one, it's a bit more relaxed, right? I don't have to, because I feel like it doesn't represent my everything else, which shouldn't represent in our community. But I think how it is in brown communities. Like, we think about what society's going to think, or what the community's going to think. Exactly.
No, absolutely. I think it's like even a reflection of whatever you choose to do in your life. Whoever, for example, you choose to get married to somebody, we keep going back to like career, but it's a big one. Whatever my son is a engineer, my daughter is a doctor. It's almost like you achieve something, and then it comes back and it's like, oh, but so and so's child did this, and it's a representation. It wasn't a you effort. You didn't sit the exam. Your whole family sat the exam with you, and now we've all got the degree. It is a very collectivistic experience. So you're right. Equally, if we do, it's on Smruthy's point, if on the same note, if we do something that is shameful, it is the whole family that experiences that shame. Or I don't know whether if you guys have experienced this or noticed it with your clients or the people that you've been surrounded by, but I think even in terms of mental health or any type of sort of sad emotions, so you're coming back to anxiety as well. I think there's lack of understanding, but also when you express that, and I find this with my young people, when they express that to their parents feeling really, I think almost either guilty or upset that their child is feeling that way and not understanding why, because you've got everything. We move countries for you. You shouldn't be feeling any of this. So actually, on that topic, like dismissiveness, what do people think about dismissiveness in terms of mental health?
There is a lot of that deflection, denial, dismissing somebody's lived experience, especially if that person is young. And, you were using the example of parents who a lot of times tend to think that they know better and they know their child. But you don't actually know somebody else's lived experience. You can't actually be in their shoes. And there is not really a lot of empathy expressed towards young people, especially. They definitely have it harder because they grew up in a world where they're supposed to be empathized with and they're supposed to have access to all of these things. They're being actively told, feel your feelings, and then you go home and you're being told you don't have any feelings. So it doesn't make sense.
And then you're like, which one is it?
Yeah.
Right. Just a shout out to all the parents out there. They may have not had the support or the language when they were growing up. So that's where this intergenerational sort of stories and of distress may be present. That earlier we used to sort of locate the blame towards them, but now in my practice I try to sort of even put out that perspective that they have a story. Are you curious to know that?
Yeah.
I really agree with what Bimba said. I think like we hear this common thing in like my parents or grandparents of like, oh, back in India, no one has anxiety, but it's because no one talked about it. And if you actually sit and look down and hear their stories and experiences, you see that they did struggle with anxiety. They just developed different coping strategies, a way to avoid and deflect. And it's passed on generation to generation. And we as like first gen or second gen migrants are almost having to do the healing for a whole community and a whole family to kind of name it and then support them with their own healing too. So it's a really tricky one to navigate.
Absolutely. That is such a great point. I'm just thinking because I mean, look, when you look back at your own families as well, and I think we were talking about migration earlier, but there are so many experiences of anxiety. And I think it's until you start defining those things at home or having those conversations maybe even with your parents, very generally speaking, you start realizing that most people, like you learn to sort of almost be anxious from the people around you, like, understanding that actually mom might be really anxious. Like she might spend all of Saturday cleaning the house and making everything perfect because that's the only thing that she can control right now, has like, has control over. I think, if you had somebody come up to you and be like, hey, how do I start these conversations at home? How do I start raising awareness around mental health at home? What would your advice be to those people?
Yeah, I might quickly pitch in. I would love to hear everyone's perspectives because, side story, I've reached out to professional help early this year, but I still haven't told my parents about it. And I would love to hear. Give me some tips. This is your ideal client right here. Give me some suggestions. I'm
Yeah, like
really keen to hear this.
how do you segue into the conversation?
Always. I think it's really tricky because it's also about relationship building, and sometimes it's step one is just building that relationship with your parents or the people you trust, and kind of going from there, even though it's very long and really hard. I think something I found really helpful for myself and my experience when talking to my parents was kind of telling them about what exactly I was finding really hard, and they could kind of see that these things are really hard for me. And once they kind of moved past of like, oh, maybe surely that's not what it is, and they could see like, okay, this is a specific thing that's Mallika's finding really hard. It became less scary and more like about, hey, let's get help to deal with this specific thing because we know how it impacts you and all of us in different ways. So I think that was something that I found really helpful in hindsight. Also, shout out to my parents. They were amazing. So supporting my mental health, I definitely lucked out. But yeah.
Oh, that's good. And just continuing on from what Malika said, that you need to have that relationship already with them. You can't just go up to your parents if you don't talk about this at all, and then just lob this at them that, hey, I'm seeing a therapist, and then leave them to their own devices. That's really hard. But it's so much. Yeah, it's so much easier if you also tell them what therapy is helping you achieve, because guess what? Everybody likes to listen to a positive story. So if you're actually telling them, just like Malika said, that these are the things I'm finding hard to navigate, but hey, guess what? This professional is helping me overcome these barriers. That can make a lot of sense to people. It can be much less stigmatizing as well when you speak about it. But it's also very hard to straddle that position of messenger with your families, because maybe not everyone has to do that. Some people maybe can manage it better themselves when they compartmentalize and keep that information safe from their families. And the families just don't have the skills or the coping mechanisms to deal with that kind of news. And it's okay. Give yourself permission to access what you need. Remember that you don't always need your parents' permission to go to therapy. Just mentioning that there is another side to this as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that can be true and is acceptable, and it's okay to sort of reach out to that. And I mean, growing up, I think the physical pace of my parents and me talking is threatening enough, or was it's a perceived sense of stress. And one of the things that is has helped me personally, and also just recommending it to people out there who are not ready to have a conversation, is write it down on paper. You don't have to sort of write a letter, write a short post-it note. It's fine, whatever you want to sort of, because what we are scared of is their reaction to it. And they also have the pressure to react to it and the quickest one is probably dismissing, or because they are also it's a surprise to them, or what's happening. So just maybe sort of scaffold it into a conversation on paper, write it down as a journal for yourself first, see how it looks like. You don't have to write the first letter and give it to them. Just take it slow, and then probably have a conversation after they have taken the time to process it, because one thing young people don't do is give the time for the other person to process. And this is true for relationships, with friendships, with family relationships as well.
It's almost like needing that instantaneous, like I need the validation right now that everything's going to be okay. But I think even that idea of having layers, like I love that relationship building. Yes, first step, the second step is maybe it's not even about your own mental health. Maybe it's just like really general conversation around, hey, I heard about XYZ today. Like, what's your understanding of it? Or like, did you maybe relating it back to their experience? Because you look realistically, some things about your parents, whether if it's about their past, their childhood, even how they experience maybe work day to day. Like I know, hey, Dad, you felt really nervous about XYZ. That's actually like maybe that's a symptom of anxiety. The more that you learn about certain things, the more that you can start educating your families around that stuff. And then once they've developed a bit of an understanding, then maybe like segueing into like, hey, we've been talking about this a lot recently. Well, I've been experiencing XYZ. Because I think you guys are right. The moment you go head first into it, especially if it's a foreign concept, and we're like this is just how humans are. It doesn't matter what the foreign concept is. We just go like, whoa, what? No. And we like, COVID's a great example. It took us 2 years to understand what was happening. And I don't think I even still fully understand what's going on. So it's like, not having literacy and not having an understanding around it can really have an impact. If we were going to look at overcoming anxiety, so finding some strategies to work through how you're feeling, what would your sort of suggestions or tips be? Could be really
Pretty
general.
high up. Pretty high up on the list would be talk to the professional.
Yes, seek professional help. Definitely.
If you need it, come talk to us.
Yes.
We promise we won't bite you.
That's scary.
There is there is actually no judgment involved. It shouldn't be hard to imagine. But yet nobody's going to judge you. Nobody's going to think any less of you. And guess what? A lot of people sometimes don't even have diagnosable anxiety disorders.
No.
They just benefit from talking to us. Good for them.
Exactly. But Smruthy, what's the difference between talking to a therapist and talking to my friends?
That's a question. Right? Because I have so many friends. Why don't I just do like
why would I choose someone? What's the difference? Why are you wasting your money for?
And I think a lot of Indian parents would ask, I know for sure my parents would ask me if they were paying for therapy for me. They would be like, we want to know what's going on, or like, what are the results?
Why are we not finding this out the next day? It's like, it's going to take time, guys. Yeah. Even a broken leg takes weeks to heal.
Exactly. But the difference when you talk to a professional is that you're going to sit with them and brainstorm what you actually want to do, what you actually want to get out of the process, because there are shared goals in that relationship with that professional. It's not like talking to your friends where they can, they can sympathize with you, they can commiserate and give suggestions. But with talking to a professional, you're actually led through that conversation in a way that is helpful for you. That is the ultimate goal for that person. And there is no personal stuff. When somebody comes to talk to me, I'm not telling them about my life. We are not dumping on each other about what happened during the day. That space is entirely for the client, for them to utilize it the way that fits them best. So it's a space all for you to talk about everything you want to talk about and figure your way out of problems. So that would be, I think, really important to highlight. But it's also necessary sometimes to find out from a professional what next, how to move forward. Do I need a diagnosis? Do I need medication? Do I need to see my GP? Do I need to talk to another professional? That's something that only somebody who knows what they're talking about would know. So if you are at that point, definitely talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
And understanding the fact that when you come to to talk therapy, or even when you go to see a psychologist or a counselor or any type of therapist, we use different approaches. What I might use in therapy might be very different to what Smruthy uses, or Bimba uses, or Mallika uses in practice. We learn so many different types of things, and we might have things that we prefer. I might prefer acceptance commitment therapy, but I might really love using that with emotion focused therapy as well. And so you have to understand that there are different techniques, and we use these in practice because it isn't a one size fits all. It's not like I'm going to tell you X, Y, Z, and then everything will just be fixed. It is a process, and it's very individualized as well. So I think that's another, those two things in combination with what Smruthy said and what I've just highlighted, that's what the difference is between just talking to your friends or a family member and actually seeking professional help. I think any other strategies?
I would definitely like to reinforce that it's brave to seek support and not your weakness. It's like you need support. You're on a journey. You just need some support. You need to sort of unpack your backpack and take off the load, see what's happening, and then carry on the journey forward. It's not like the end when you see a therapist. It's not like now I've just done with it. But I think what we were talking about earlier about the awareness of it, right? How do I know if my anxiety, or I'm feeling anxious today, I'm feeling anxious tomorrow, I may have felt anxious last week. So sometimes mood tracking apps are good, just to sort of identify how what's the intensity, how bad is it. And sometimes our memories are very, very foggy, so we don't know what's happening. So I think mood tracking apps are one subtle way to sort of check in with yourself. It's just a check in, and we have countless memes and emojis that you can sort of build on and connect with. You don't have to do it a paper pencil one these days. uh,
Absolutely.
so that's, and I think just being open and curious about, hey, why is this happening,
Yeah.
rather than treating it like a problem centric. Oh my God, I got a problem. I don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, and I guess. Oh, you go. Sorry, Malika.
Now you go, Kano.
Fine, I'll go now. I guess then I just want to plug in. Therapy is one of the best things that I've done. 100% recommend to anyone that might be wondering. Oh, do I access it? Do I not access it? 100% go for it. Best thing I've ever done. But I guess the other thing that's helping me is setting up good practices, self-care practices.
Yeah.
Even though I don't need him, or might not need him now, or might not need him in the next couple of months, but I just still having them there as habits. So that's little things, and that's for me. I had to test out a few different things that work, whether that's journaling, whether that's going for daily walks, whether that's doing all these things, going to bed early, eating clean, all those things. All those little self-care things that I'm just going to test out. Do I like drawing? Do I like sketching? Do I like coloring in? What are these things that has helped other people? What's going to help me? So what I did was just test out different things and see which ones I liked and which ones I guess weren't my favorite. And I guess from there I picked up one or two habits that I still take on today. So I think sometimes just figuring out what are those self-care habits for you, because a lot of the times if we don't have that dialogue, or we've never had to use it maybe perhaps in our life previously until COVID and other stuff happened, we're like, oh crap, how do I handle this? But it's important for the future that we have a few things that are going for us so that we have control over, that we know regardless of what happens during our day, we can access, whether that's journaling, going for a walk, or doing something like that.
Yeah, I really like that. Self-care is super important, guys.
Kano, you literally said what I was going to say about having a little toolbox or toolkit of stuff that you can pull from, and whether that's general self-care activities, whether it's speaking to a professional, it's finding what works for you and knowing that some things will work for you on some days and other things will work for you on other days. I think another important thing is also not feeling ashamed to ask for help. And asking for help can look different. It can be like knowing that you're struggling and asking your mom to make you some dal and rice for dinner because you can't cook, or asking your friend for help because you're really struggling with your assignment and need someone to sit down next for you. So just knowing you can ask for help in loads of different ways, and sometimes you have to listen to yourself and know what you need in that moment, and being okay with asking for that help.
Yeah, that's such a great point, though. Even in terms of social support, comfort for some people who are quite anxious could just feel like having, somebody that you're close to, maybe your best friend, sitting in the room with you, or they're on FaceTime and you're on FaceTime and you're both not talking to each other, you're just doing your own thing. But it might be a good sort of, just little things can make a huge difference. We've got a question. What if you've tried multiple avenues and still feel like nothing is working for you? How do you not give up on your mental health journey? What is the toolkit itself is starting to give you anxiety because it feels like you don't have one? Oh, okay, great question. Anyone?
I think that's a pretty big one. That would definitely be a point where you start building a team, and you know that the toolkit itself is not enough because you're trying to be self-reliant, and that's probably not the best way to add more pressure to yourself to deal with this by yourself. So yeah, start building a team, whether that's social support, professional support, family support. What activities do you need to do outside of what you're doing right now? And what Malika said is so important, that you need to ask for help, because other people can't tell. You can experience the anxiety, but to a lot of people on the outside, you probably look super functional, or you're a high achiever. You look like you've got everything down pat, but they can't tell that you're struggling until and unless you actually express that to them or you ask for help. And yeah, I think removing the stigma and shame around asking for help will go a long way with that.
And I think that there is that sense of whether you are a student, whether you're working, there are support services available in your office, which is your. People rarely use it. It's called employee assistance program. Not That's sort of the gateway through it. Or if you're a student, check out your university student council. Check out your well-being setup in a school or a college that's there, uh, and there are even groups available, so sometimes it feels okay for us to be a part of a group. So they're like what Malika and Kano are doing, like youth support groups are a great, very casual conversation. No one's going to put a gun on your head and say you have to share a story. So I think just be more open, like take that risk with yourself to just go out there, and you don't have to do it alone. So grab a friend, grab someone with you to feel that sense of connection, confidence.
Absolutely.
I
think-
also, oh, sorry.
No, you go first.
I was going to say, I also think with this, especially with anxiety, like it comes and goes in waves, and sometimes it's a thing of time. Like sometimes it is just going to be that time where it is really hard, and I think that's something to keep in mind, as well as context. Like maybe there are stuff going on for you that are out of your control that are just making it harder for you. Like, for example, maybe you've just moved countries, like that is a really hard time, or maybe your workplace is really toxic at the moment and you can't just quit, but that's going to impact you and that's not really in your control. So I think it's just looking at all the other factors around you that might be impacting how you're feeling at the moment.
Definitely, because those things can come in combination and then affect you. On the note of seeking support as well, just remember that you might go to see a therapist and you might go for another one and another one. And I've recently been seeing a lot of people who have been to therapy multiple times over multiple years. And honestly, it might just be that, and I guess the common sort of thing was like, oh, well, therapy didn't really work for me last time. If it's not working for you, there are a multitude of reasons. It could be maybe that the type of therapy that you're doing is not a good fit for you. Maybe you and your therapist are not a good fit for each other either. Believe me, the first therapist that you meet might actually not be the person that you get along with the most, or their approach might not be the most helpful. And it's kind of like when you're going shoe shopping, you've got to try on a couple sometimes, unfortunately, until you find the one that you really like. And then once you do have that, it will work. And I know that can be really tiring because you don't want to keep explaining everything over and over again. But just do bear in mind that maybe the first person that you see isn't going to be the best person for you. And that's okay. There's no harm in trying again. And yeah, opening up conversations with your friends, guys. Talk to other people, because believe it or not, most people might actually, I mean, I said the stats earlier today, right? That's like 1 in 6 people. So think about the 6 people that you saw last in like a room, and one of those people will probably be feeling anxious to some degree. There are 33 million people who are going through this on a daily basis. So even talking about it, seeing what other people's strategies are, who they've sought support from or help from, it makes all of the difference in the world.
If that's the statistics, you might, sorry.
You go, Bimba.
Yeah, so if you're saying it's 1 in 6, you can be on the other side, that you can do a check-in for your friend or your relative. So
we keep talking about, are you okay, Dave?
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
No, I was just going to add in, if you are, I know coming from, being a male, myself being in very, there's that stigma around males not talking about mental health, and that is, that is somewhat true. Normally when I'm hanging out with males, it's not something that we talk about, because one, everyone else thinks if I talk about it, I'm going to be seen as the weak one, or I'm going to be seen as, that not that weird one, but I'm going to be outed if I talk about mental health, or I'm talking about something that I'm going through. But sometimes it is that taking that step and like, all right, lads, all right, boys, let's talk about it. Maybe just, it doesn't have to be anything big, but it could just be something little like, oh, we're going to this event, or we're going to here, I'm feeling a bit anxious, or feeling a bit, it might be too much. Can we just chill for 5 minutes before then, once I get comfortable, we can start doing our thing. So maybe it doesn't have to be like sit down, all right, everyone sit down, let's have a conversation. It can be, we can talk about it in a relaxed, in a chill way that works in your friendship group, especially for the males out there, because it is very common. And no, we don't really talk about it that openly, I guess.
Yeah, that is such a great point. And we've got a comment around this as well. Definitely, I definitely do feel like there are taboos around discussing mental health with your friends. But you're absolutely right. Having sort of casual conversations can go a long way. Even little conversations can go a long way. We need to start normalizing the fact that mental health is still health. Physical health is health as well, right? If you've got something going on for you, there is not something. It's not a bad thing. It's the same as if you were to break your leg or you cut your hand by accident because you were, I don't know, trying to open something, or you've burnt something. I'm trying to think about physical symptoms and I can't think of anything. It's the very same thing. And just like your brain is the most important organ in your body. It makes your meat sack stay alive. You've got to look after it. Yeah.
And I think this whole image in the social media is that you're comparing your inner self with someone's external self.
Yeah.
So that's not true. So it is so difficult to sort of assume. It's so easy to assume that the world is perfect and everyone has a perfect life. And one of the sort of easy strategies that you can implement, and that has been my practice since the last 1 year, is I have switched off all notifications on my phone, including WhatsApp and other social media, which means I am present in the moment. Right now, I'm talking to you. And messages can wait, calls can wait. You can recall, you can reply later. So that's one thing that I often recommend young people to at least practice it for 1 hour a day, half an hour, try 10 minutes. Because there is that constant sense of, we are
There's an
reacting.
urgency. It's an urgency. Everything needs to happen today, right now, immediately. There's no space and time to sort of breathe. When are you breathing? Are you noticing yourself breathing? That's another aspect of anxiety. You get so caught up in everything else that you just forget your everyday basic things. Yeah. Well, on that note, we are almost done. I guess I just wanted to see whether if there is only one takeaway that everyone that's watching takes away from this conversation, what would that be for each of you?
Have more conversations.
Have more conversations. Great. What else?
I think I'd say it's doable. It's possible. If you do feel anxious, or if you suspect that you might suffer from anxiety, you know what? It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It is possible to get through that. So yeah, just think about the fact that this won't last forever.
I love that.
I'm just gonna add it. It's totally normal. You're not different. Don't worry. There's nothing wrong with you. It's totally normal to feel that way, and there's plenty of help and avenues out there for you. So.
I would just say don't be afraid to ask for help. Help looks different for everyone. And so find the help that works best for you, and don't be afraid to try different things and say no to some things along the way as well.
Yeah. I love all of these. Yeah, it is absolutely okay for you not to be okay. You're allowed to sit in your anxiety. You're allowed to sit in your sadness. You're allowed to feel it, because if you don't feel it, you won't heal from it. And look, I think it was something that we were spoken about a little bit earlier, but we're talking about, being resilient and just sort of pushing through. And I think we tend to do that, especially the migrant experiences, just push through whatever hurdle comes our way and just keep pushing through till the end. And so we master that art of bouncing back. But just because you've mastered the art of bouncing back, it doesn't mean that you need to continue doing that. I think maybe now it's time for people to start mastering the art of not having to bounce back. So that's coming back to Kano's previous, comment about self-care. That is very, very important. Well, on that note, thanks, Anita. On that note, thank you everyone so much for tuning in today. Thank you to our lovely guests for being part of this conversation. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions or comments after this has been recorded, feel free to pop them into the comments. Does everyone actually want to go around and give any plugs for socials or ways to contact you? Otherwise, I will pop them in the comments. No? All right, cool. In that case, good night, everyone. Thank you.